My son Brandon looked me dead in the eye across the white linen tablecloth of a five-star restaurant and spit in my face. He did not just yell. He did not just insult me. He gathered the saliva in his mouth and launched it at the man who taught him how to walk. I did not wipe it off. I let it sit there on my cheek, heavy and warm as the entire restaurant went silent. I let it dry as a reminder. That was the moment my son died to me. That was the moment he became nothing more than a bad investment I had to liquidate. I stood up without saying a word, walked out the door, and made a phone call that would turn his million-dollar life into a pile of rubble. But before I tell you how I destroyed my son's world in less than 24 hours, let me tell you where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been underestimated by the very people you sacrificed everything for. My name is Clint. I am 70 years old. I spent 40 years of my life with calloused hands and dust in my lungs building the skyline of Chicago. I started as a bricklayer and ended up owning the construction firm that built the very building my son lives in. But to Brandon and his wife Vanessa, I was just a walking checkbook in a cheap suit. The night it happened was supposed to be a celebration. It was their 10th wedding anniversary. Brandon had insisted we go to the Gilded Fork. It is the kind of place where a glass of water costs more than the hourly wage I earned when I was 20. I arrived 10 minutes early because that is how I was raised. If you are not early, you are late. I was wearing my charcoal suit. It was a good suit. Italian wool. I bought it in '95 for my wife's funeral, and I had kept it in plastic ever since. It was a little tight around the shoulders now, and the lapels were too wide for modern fashion, but it was clean and pressed. To me, it represented respect. To Vanessa, it represented a smell she could not stand. When they finally arrived 20 minutes late, they did not apologize. They swept in like royalty. Brandon was wearing a watch that cost as much as a small car. Vanessa was dripping in gold jewelry that I knew for a fact they could not afford. She kissed the air next to my cheek and wrinkled her nose. "Oh, Clint," she said with that high-pitched voice she uses when she wants to be cruel. "You wore that old thing again. It smells like mothballs and attic dust." We are sitting near the CEO of Techstar at the next table. Please try not to draw attention to yourself. I said nothing. I just sat down and placed my hands on the table. My hands are rough. They have scars from hammers and saws. They are the hands that paid for Vanessa's nose job and Brandon's MBA. She looked at my hands and then kicked Brandon under the table. I felt the thud against his shin. She whispered something to him, and he quickly grabbed the menu from my place setting. "Here, Dad, let me order for you," Brandon said, his voice loud enough for the tables nearby to hear. "You always get confused by these fancy menus. The font is too small for your eyes anyway." "I am not confused, Brandon," I said quietly. "I can read perfectly fine without my glasses." He ignored me. He ordered a bottle of wine that cost $400. He ordered the tasting menu for himself and Vanessa. Then he looked at the waiter and pointed at me with his thumb. "Bring him the chicken soup and a side of bread," he said. "He has trouble chewing steak these days. Digestion issues, you know how it is with the elderly." The waiter looked at me with pity. I did not have digestion issues. I still ate steak 3 times a week. But I saw the game they were playing. They wanted me small. They wanted me frail. They wanted me to be the confused old man who needed their guidance. I sat there while they drank their expensive wine. They did not ask me how I was. They did not ask about my garden or my health. They talked about their trip to Aspen. They talked about the new Porsche Brandon wanted to lease. They talked through me as if I were a piece of furniture that had been placed in the wrong room. Vanessa kept glancing at the table next to us, checking if the important people were looking. Every time I reached for my water glass, she tensed up as if she expected me to spill it and embarrass them. "You know, Clint," she said, swirling her wine, "we really need to do something about your living situation. That in-law suite at our house is just getting too cluttered. You hoard things. It is unsanitary. I do not hoard, Vanessa, I said. Those are my tools. That is my life's work. It is junk, she snapped. And it smells. Brandon and I were thinking it might be time for you to look at other options. Places with professionals who can help you bathe and manage your hygiene. I gripped the napkin in my lap. I showered every morning. I shaved every day. I was cleaner than the two of them combined because my conscience was clean. Let's not talk about this now, honey, Brandon said. But he gave her a look that said, stick to the script. The food arrived. My soup was lukewarm. Their plates were works of art. I ate slowly, watching them. I have built foundations on sandy soil, and I know what a structural crack looks like. My son was cracking. He was drinking the wine too fast. His laugh was too loud. He was sweating even though the air conditioning was freezing. He checked his phone every 30 seconds. I knew the signs. I had seen them on job sites with contractors who were in over their heads. Brandon was desperate. And desperate men do dangerous things. When the dessert plates were cleared, Brandon finally made his move. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a blue folder. He placed it on the table, avoiding the wine glasses. He did not smile. He put on his serious business face, the one he thought made him look like a tycoon, but only made him look like a child playing dress-up. Dad, we need to talk business, he said. I wiped my mouth. I thought this was an anniversary dinner, Brandon. It is, but this is important. You know the market is volatile right now. My company is positioned for massive growth, but we need liquidity. And frankly, Dad, I am worried about your assets. You are letting money sit in low-yield bonds. It is rotting away. I looked at the blue folder. What is this? It is a transfer of management agreement, Brandon said, sliding a pen toward me. It is simple, really. It just appoints me as the primary trustee of the family trust. I will manage the portfolio. I will modernize it. You will still get your monthly stipend, of course, but I will handle the heavy lifting. You are 70, Dad. You should not be worrying about tax codes and investment strategies. You should be resting. I opened the folder. I did not need my reading glasses to see what it was. It was a full power of attorney and a total transfer of assets. It would give him control over the $2 million in liquid cash I had saved for 40 years. It would give him the deed to the land. It would give him everything. I looked at the papers and then I looked at Vanessa. She was leaning forward, her eyes hungry. She was practically drooling over that signature line. I closed the folder. No. Brandon blinked. What do you mean, no? I mean no, Brandon. I am not signing this. Dad, you are not listening, Vanessa hissed. We are trying to help you. You are not capable of managing this anymore. Last week you forgot where you put your keys. That is the first sign of dementia. I forgot my keys because you moved them, Vanessa. I said, my voice steady. And I know exactly what is happening here. I know you are not expanding your business, Brandon. I know you lost the contract with the city last month. I know you are leveraged to the hilt on the house I built for you. Brandon's face went white. How do you know that? I still have friends in this city, son. I built half of it. People talk. You are broke. You are drowning in debt because you spend money like water to impress people who do not care about you. And now you want my retirement money to plug the holes in your sinking ship. You are selfish, Brandon shouted. People turned to look. He did not care. The wine had done its work. You are a selfish, hoarding old man. That money is doing nothing. It is just sitting there while I am trying to build a legacy. Your legacy is a lie, I said. I built a legacy with sweat. You are building a debt prison. I will not let you throw my life's work into the furnace of your vanity. Brandon stood up. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. He was shaking. The veins in his neck were bulging. He looked at me with pure hatred. It was a look I had never seen before. It was the look of a child who realizes the candy store is closed forever. "You think you are so superior?" he sneered. "You think because you laid bricks, you are a god. You are nothing. You are a guest in my house. You are a leech. I let you live in that apartment out of charity." "It is not your house, Brandon," I said calmly. "I paid for the materials. I paid for the labor." "It is in my name," he screamed. He was losing control. Vanessa tried to grab his arm, but he shook her off. He leaned over the table, getting right in my face. I could smell the expensive wine and the cheap desperation on his breath. "Sign the papers, old man. Sign them, or so help me God, I will throw you out on the street tonight. I will put you in the worst state-run nursing home I can find, and I will let you rot there." I looked him in the eye. I did not blink. I did not flinch. No. That was when it happened. He made a sound in his throat, a guttural, disgusted sound, and then he spit. It hit me on the left cheek just below the eye, a glob of white foam and saliva. The restaurant went dead silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. The low murmur of conversation vanished. The CEO at the next table dropped his fork. Vanessa gasped, but she did not apologize. She did not hand me a napkin. She looked at me, and then she looked at Brandon, and she smirked. A small, cruel smile that said, "You deserved that." "Low it off, Dad," she said coldly. "And sign the papers. Stop making a scene." I sat there for 5 seconds. I felt the wetness on my skin. I felt the heat of it. In those 5 seconds, my entire history with my son flashed before my eyes. I saw myself teaching him to ride a bike. I saw myself paying for his first suit. I saw myself signing the check for his wedding. And then I saw him as he was now, a stranger, an enemy. I did not wipe my face. I wanted to remember this feeling. I wanted it to burn into my skin so I would never have a moment of weakness again. I slowly stood up. My knees popped, but I stood tall. I am 6'2". I still have the shoulders of a man who carried concrete blocks for a living. I towered over him. Brandon took a step back. He looked suddenly afraid. He expected me to hit him. He expected the violence of a father disciplining a child. But I did something much worse. I gave him nothing. I looked at the spit on my cheek. Then I looked at him. "You say that is your house," I said, my voice low and gravelly like a cement mixer. "You say I am a guest." I picked up the blue folder. I did not open it. I just held it. "Okay, Brandon. You win. It is your house." I dropped the folder on the table. "Enjoy it while you can." I turned around and walked away. I heard Vanessa calling after me. "Where are you going? Come back here. You are not walking home." I did not look back. I walked past the shocked maitre d'. I walked out the heavy glass doors into the cool Chicago night. The wind hit my face, cooling the spot where my son had marked me. I did not go home. I walked 3 blocks to a convenience store. I bought a prepaid phone because I knew they would track my location if I used my old one. Then I called a number I had not dialed in 10 years. "Mr. Solomon," I said, when the voice answered. "Clint. Is that you? It is 2 in the morning. "I know, Solomon. I need you to open the file." "Which file, Clint?" "The Redwood file. The one we set up when I bought the land for Brandon's house." There was a long silence on the other end. "Are you sure?" Clint Solomon asked. "That is the nuclear option. Once we pull that trigger, there is no going back. It will destroy him." I touched my cheek. It was dry now, but I could still feel it. "Pull it," I said. "Initiate the eviction." And Solomon. "Yes. Sell it all. Sell the company. Sell the land. Sell the debt. I want him on the street by Friday." I hung up the phone. I stood on the corner of Michigan Avenue under the yellow glow of the street lamp. I was 70 years old. I had no home to go to tonight. I had just declared war on my own blood, and for the first time in years, I felt completely and utterly alive. They thought I was a helpless old man. They thought I was a senile hoarder they could bully into submission. They forgot who I was. I am the man who pours the concrete. I am the man who buries the steel. And tomorrow I was going to bury them. It was 3 in the morning when I stood in front of the iron gates of the estate. I welded those gates myself 10 years ago. I remember the heat of the torch and the smell of ozone in the air. I made them strong to keep the world out and protect my family. Now they were keeping me out. I punched my code into the keypad. Nothing. The red light blinked once. Access denied. I tried again. Denied. Brandon had not just spit on me at dinner. He had erased me from the system before dessert was even served. I walked around the perimeter of the property. The brick wall was 8 feet high, topped with decorative spikes that I had installed myself. 20 years ago, I would have vaulted over it without spilling my coffee. Now my joints ached, and the cold Chicago wind was biting through my thin suit jacket. But I am not a man who stops at walls. I built them. I know their weaknesses. I found the spot near the old oak tree where the mortar was slightly recessed. I jammed the toe of my dress shoe into the crack, ruining the leather. I pulled myself up. My shoulder screamed in protest. I gritted my teeth and hauled my body over the top, dropping into the azalea bushes on the other side. I lay there for a moment, breathing hard in the dirt of my own garden. I moved through the shadows of the yard, avoiding the motion sensor lights I had installed for their safety. My destination was the carriage house in the back, the in-law suite. That was what they called it, to make it sound dignified. I called it the garage with a bed. It was where they put me when I sold my own house to fund Brandon's startup 5 years ago. Just for a few months, Dad, until we get settled, they had said. Those months turned into years of silence and side entrances. I reached the door of the suite and slid my key into the lock. It did not turn. It bumped against new tumblers. They had changed the locks while I was at dinner. They had planned this. The anniversary dinner was not a celebration. It was a distraction. While I was sitting there being humiliated, a locksmith was here drilling out the core of my life. They wanted to make sure that if I refused to sign the papers, I would have nowhere to sleep. I went to the side window. It was painted shut, but I knew how to shim it. I used my credit card, the one with the limit they had almost maxed out, and slid the latch. I climbed inside, tearing my suit trousers on the sill. The air inside hit me like a physical blow. It was colder inside than it was outside. I flipped the light switch. Nothing. Darkness. I tried the faucet in the kitchenette. A dry rattle. No water. I walked over to the radiator. It was stone cold. I checked the breaker panel in the utility closet using the light from my prepaid phone. The switches were not tripped. The main feed had been physically disconnected from the outside. They had not just locked me out. They had cut the power, the water, and the heat in Chicago in late October. This was not just eviction. This was attempted murder by hypothermia. They wanted me to freeze, or they wanted to force me to crawl back to the main house and beg for warmth. They wanted me to sign those papers just to stop shivering. I sat on the edge of my narrow bed in the dark. I could see my breath in the moonlight filtering through the window. I looked around the room. This was my life now. A cold box filled with the few possessions they had not thrown away. My old tool belt hung on a hook. My drafting table was in the corner. The photos of my late wife were on the nightstand. I thought about Brandon. I thought about the boy who used to cry when he scraped his knee. I used to hold him and tell him it would be okay. I used to keep the house warm for him. I worked double shifts in blizzards so he would never know what it felt like to be cold. And now he had cut my heat. He had looked at the weather forecast, seen the frost warning, and decided that his father did not deserve warmth. I shivered, but it was not from the cold. It was from a rage so pure and hot, it could have heated the entire room. I stood up. I was not going to sleep here. I was not going to give them the satisfaction of finding me frozen in the morning like a stray dog. I needed to get what I came for. I needed the leverage. I dropped to my knees on the cold floorboards. My hands felt for the loose plank under the rug. This was something I built into every house I constructed. A bolt hole. A secret safe. Brandon did not know about it. Vanessa did not know about it. They looked at the surface. I looked at the structure. I pried the board up with the handle of a screwdriver I found in the dark. There it was. A metal box wrapped in oilcloth. I pulled it out. It was heavy. Inside were the original deeds, the trust documents, the ledger of every penny I had ever given them, and the master key to the LLC that technically owned this entire property. This was my insurance policy. I had hoped I would never have to use it. I hoped my son would be a man. But he was just a tenant, and tenants can be evicted. I tucked the box under my arm. I did not take clothes. I did not take the photos. I left everything exactly as it was. I wanted them to come in here in the morning and find a cold, empty room. I wanted them to wonder where the old man went. I climbed back out the window into the freezing night. They thought they had trapped me in the dark. They forgot that I was the one who wired the lights. I knew how to turn them back on, and when I did, it would be blinding. I moved through the darkness of the garden like a ghost in a graveyard I had built myself. The metal box was heavy under my arm, pressing against my ribs, a cold reminder of the leverage I now held. But I was not done. I needed to know the timeline. I needed to know exactly how much time I had before they came for me. I crept toward the main house. The lights in the library were still on, casting long yellow rectangles onto the frozen lawn. I knew that room. I had framed it. I had installed the mahogany paneling with my own hands, sanding the wood until it felt like silk. Now it was the command center for my destruction. I crouched beneath the window. It was a double-paned thermal glass, the kind I insisted on installing to keep the heating bills down. It did its job too well. The sound was muffled. But Vanessa has a voice that cuts through insulation like a diamond drill bit. She was pacing. I could see her shadow passing back and forth across the lawn. She was on the phone and she was agitated. I pressed my ear against the brickwork. The bricks were rough against my skin. I remembered laying them. It was the summer of '98. It was a scorcher, 90 degrees with 90% humidity. I worked shirtless, sweat pouring into my eyes, mixing the mortar by hand because the mixer had broken down, and I refused to delay the schedule. Brandon was 10 years old then. He sat on a pile of lumber drinking a juice box, watching me. "Dad, why don't you hire someone to do that?" he had asked. "Because when you build it yourself, son, you know it will stand," I had told him. "You know there are no hollow spots. You know it is solid." I ran my hand over the mortar joint. It was solid. I had built this house to be a fortress for my family. I built it to keep them safe from the storms, from the cold, from the world. I never imagined that 40 years later, I would be shivering outside these same walls while the people inside plotted to bury me. I had built my own prison brick by bloody brick. Vanessa's voice rose. I could hear her clearly now. "No, you do not understand," she was saying. "He is not just forgetful. He is aggressive. He spit on my husband tonight. He is a danger to himself and others. We need the secure unit." I closed my eyes. Aggressive. Danger. She was building a narrative. She was crafting a story to justify locking me away. She was painting me as a violent, senile monster so she could feel righteous about discarding me. There was a pause as she listened to the person on the other end. Then she laughed. It was a dry, brittle sound. "The price, well, What is the cheapest option you have? We do not need a private room. A shared ward is fine. He does not know where he is half the time anyway. He won't notice the difference. Just make sure it is secure. We don't want him wandering back here. I felt a crack in my chest wider than any foundation settlement. She was haggling. She was bargaining for the bargain bin disposal of her husband's father. I was not even worth a private room. I was just debris to be hauled away to the dump. Tomorrow morning, she asked. 8 a.m. perfect. Yes, bring the restraints. He is a big man. He worked in construction. He is strong for his age. You might need 2 orderlies. Maybe sedation. Just get him out of here before the neighbors see. 8 a.m. I checked my watch. It was now almost 4 in the morning. I had 4 hours. 4 hours before a van pulled up to the curb. 4 hours before strangers in white uniforms walked into the home I built and dragged me out in zip ties. 4 hours before I disappeared into the system, medicated into silence, locked in a room with strangers waiting to die while they spent my money on vacations and cars. I looked through the gap in the curtains. Brandon was sitting in my leather armchair, the one I bought when I retired. He was holding a glass of whiskey. He looked pale. He looked sick. But he was not stopping her. He was letting her make the call. He was letting her sell his father to the lowest bidder. He stared into the fireplace, avoiding her eyes, avoiding the reality of what he was allowing to happen. I remembered the day we poured the foundation for this house. We buried a time capsule in the wet concrete of the corner footing. It was Brandon's idea. He put in a baseball card and a picture of us fishing. I put in a note. It said, "May this home always be filled with love and integrity." That note was still there, encased in stone, a lie cemented into the very earth beneath their feet. They thought they were solving a problem. They thought they were removing an obstacle. They did not understand that you cannot demolish a man like me. I am structural. I am load-bearing. If you cut me out, the whole thing comes down. I backed away from the window. I had heard enough. I did not need to hear the confirmation number. I did not need to hear them toast to their freedom. I had the timeline. I had the intent. I had the fire in my belly that I hadn't felt since I was a young man fighting for my first contract. I moved back toward the perimeter wall. The wind had picked up, howling off the lake, but I didn't feel the cold anymore. My blood was boiling. They wanted a senile old man. They wanted a confused, helpless victim. I would not give them that. I would give them a ghost. When those orderlies kicked down the door of the guest suite at 8 a.m., they would find nothing but dust. I would be gone, and by the time they realized I was missing, the demolition would have already begun. I climbed back over the wall, dropping onto the sidewalk with a heavy thud. My knees buckled, but I forced myself up. I started walking toward the city lights. I walked with the rhythm of a man marching to war. 1 step, 2 steps, left, right. I was not just Clint the bricklayer anymore. I was not just Dad. I was the storm they never checked the forecast for. I was the reckoning. And as I walked away from the house that was no longer my home, I made a promise to the cold night air. By sunset tomorrow, that house would not belong to them. It would not belong to me. It would belong to the consequences of their own greed. I touched the pocket of my jacket where the prepaid phone sat. I had one more call to make before the sun came up. It was time to wake up the lawyers. It was time to start the excavators. It was time to bury the past. I walked 3 miles to a 24-hour diner on the edge of the industrial district. It was the kind of place where the coffee tastes like battery acid, and the customers do not ask questions because they are too busy running from their own ghosts. I slid into a booth in the back corner, away from the window. The vinyl seat was cracked and taped over with silver duct tape. It felt familiar. It felt like a job site. I ordered a black coffee and placed the metal box on the chipped formica table. My hands were shaking slightly. Not from the cold and not from fear. It was the adrenaline of a man who is about to detonate a bridge while he is still standing on it. I unwrapped the oilcloth. The smell of old paper and machine oil wafted up, mixing with the scent of frying bacon from the kitchen. Inside were the blueprints of my revenge. I took out the documents one by one, smoothing them flat against the table. First was the land trust agreement number 8492. I remembered the day we signed this. Brandon was 25. He was so excited to play the big-shot developer that he did not even read the fine print. He just signed where the lawyer pointed his eyes, glossing over the clause that designated me as the holder of the power of direction. He thought he owned the land. He did not understand that in the eyes of the law, he was just a glorified squatter living on my good graces. Next was the operating agreement for Redwood Holdings, LLC. This was the shell company that technically owned the house, the cars, and the accounts. I ran my thumb over the signature line. There it was. My name. Clint R. Vance. Manager. Sole member. Brandon had the title of CEO on his business cards, but I had the legal authority to fire him into the sun. Finally, I pulled out the corporate seal. It was a heavy steel embosser. I clicked it once. The sound was sharp and final, like the racking of a shotgun slide. This stamp had the power to validate the sale of every single asset. With this, I could sell the ground out from under his feet before he even woke up to brush his teeth. I looked at my watch. It was 4:15 in the morning. The city was asleep. Brandon was asleep, probably dreaming of the nursing home he was going to dump me in. Vanessa was asleep, probably dreaming of redecorating my room. I took the prepaid phone out of my pocket. I dialed the number I had memorized a decade ago. It rang 4 times. Solomon here. The voice was gravelly thick with sleep but alert. He was a lawyer who slept with one eye open. It is Clint, I said. Clint, I have not heard from you since the closing on the lake house. What time is it? It is time to work, Solomon. I need you to wake up. I need you to go to your office. There was a pause. I heard the rustle of sheets and the click of a lamp turning on. Is this about the trust? Yes. I have the papers in front of me. I am invoking Article 7, Section 3. Solomon let out a low whistle. Section 3. That is the scorched earth clause, Clint. That strips the beneficiary of all rights and reverts all assets to the grantor immediately. You only put that in there in case of gross misconduct or criminal activity. Is spitting in my face criminal activity, Solomon? Is cutting the heat to my room in freezing temperatures criminal activity? Is conspiring to commit me to a state facility against my will gross misconduct? The line went silent for 10 seconds. When Solomon spoke again, his voice had changed. The sleep was gone. It was replaced by the cold precision of a shark smelling blood in the water. Start talking, Clint. Tell me everything. I told him. I told him about the dinner. I told him about the spit. I told him about the locks and the heat and the phone call to the orderlies. I kept my voice flat. I did not cry. I stated the facts like I was listing materials for a build. 2 tons of concrete, 500 pounds of rebar, one son who betrayed me. When I finished, Solomon exhaled slowly. Okay, Clint. We have grounds. More than grounds. We have a war crime. But you need to understand what happens next. If we file the revocation of beneficial interest and the eviction notice simultaneously, we freeze everything. His bank accounts, his credit cards, the locks on the house. Do it, I said. And the sale. You mentioned selling. I want the land sold, Solomon. I do not care about the price. I want a cash buyer. I want a quick close. I want it gone by noon. You know who buys land that fast, Clint? Waste management companies. Heavy industry. People who want to put a parking lot or a dump where a mansion used to be. Perfect, I said. Sell it to the garbage men. It seems fitting considering what is living in the house right now. I can have the paperwork filed electronically when the courts open at 8. But I need the seal, Clint. I need you to stamp the transfer order. I have it, I said. I am looking at it right now. Good. Meet me at my office at 6 a.m. Bring the box and Clint. Yes. Are you sure? Once we do this, he is not your son anymore. He is just a defendant. I looked down at the coffee in my cup. It was cold. I looked at the spit stain that I could still feel burning on my cheek. He stopped being my son when he wiped his mouth and walked away, Solomon. Now he is just a tenant who is behind on the rent. I will see you at 6. I hung up the phone. I clicked the corporate seal one more time. Clack. It was the sound of a judge's gavel. It was the sound of a door locking. I drank the cold coffee in one gulp. It tasted bitter. But it woke me up. I gathered the papers and put them back in the box. I wrapped the oilcloth tight. I stood up and threw a $5 bill on the table. I walked out of the diner into the pre-dawn gray. The city was starting to stir. Delivery trucks were rumbling down the street. The world was waking up. And in a few hours, my son was going to wake up too. But he was not going to wake up in his $1 million bedroom. He was going to wake up in a nightmare of my design. And I was going to be the one to serve him the eviction notice. I was not there to see it, but I know exactly how it happened, because I know the acoustics of that carriage house better than I know the back of my own hand. At exactly 8 in the morning, the heavy white van from the state facility would have pulled up to the service entrance. 2 orderlies built like linebackers would have stepped out, carrying the restraints Vanessa had requested. They would have marched across the frozen lawn, their breath puffing in the cold air, expecting a struggle with a confused geriatric patient. Brandon would have been watching from the kitchen window, coffee mug in hand, waiting for the problem to be removed. He likely felt a mix of guilt and relief the way a man feels when he finally calls the exterminator. Vanessa would not have felt guilt. She would have been calculating the square footage of my room, planning where to put her yoga mats. I imagine the orderlies knocked once. A courtesy knock. When there was no answer, they would have used the master key Brandon gave them. But the key would not have worked because I had jammed the mechanism from the inside before I climbed out the window. That was my little goodbye present. A final act of defiance. They would have kicked the door. The wood would have splintered with a loud crack echoing off the brick walls of the main house. They would have rushed in ready to subdue a violent man. But all they found was silence. They found a bed that had not been slept in. They found a radiator that was ice cold to the touch. They found a room stripped of the man who built it. No clothes, no photos, no secret metal box under the floorboards, just dust and the lingering smell of old timber. I can picture the phone call, the lead orderly calling Brandon. Mr. Vance, the subject, is gone. The room is empty. I can picture Brandon dropping his mug, the ceramic shattering on the tile floor. I can picture him running across the yard in his slippers, sliding on the frost, bursting into the room, his eyes scanning the corners as if I were hiding in the shadows like a child. "Where is he?" he would have screamed. "He has dementia. He cannot just disappear." Vanessa would have come running after him, her silk robe flapping in the wind. She would have looked at the open window, the scratch marks on the sill, the emptiness where her victory was supposed to be. And for the first time since she married my son, she would have felt true fear. Because a senile man wanders off and gets lost, but a man who cleans out his safe and disappears without a trace is a man who has a plan. They were not dealing with a patient anymore. They were dealing with a phantom. While they were panic-searching the grounds, checking the bushes, and calling the local hospitals, I was 3 miles away, standing in the locker room of the Chicago Athletic Association. I have been a member since 1985. I paid my dues every month, even when money was tight, because a man needs a place where he is still respected. I stood under the scalding hot water of the shower for 20 minutes, washing away the smell of the diner, washing away the feeling of the spit on my cheek, washing away the last 10 years of being a doormat. I scrubbed my skin until it was red. I watched the dirt and the doubt swirl down the drain. I stepped out and wrapped a thick white towel around my waist. I stood in front of the mirror. I looked at the face that stared back. It was lined. It was weathered. But the eyes were clear. The fog of submission had lifted. I shaved. I took my time. I used a straight razor because I have a steady hand. I scraped away the gray stubble, revealing the jawline that had shouted orders over the roar of jackhammers. I splashed cold water on my face. I opened the shopping bag I had picked up from the department store as soon as they opened their doors. I put on a crisp white shirt. I put on a charcoal tie. I put on a new navy blue suit that fit me properly, not the old one that smelled of moths. I tied my shoes double knots, tight and secure. When I walked out of that locker room, I was not Clint the hoarder. I was not Clint the burden. I was Clint Vance, founder of Redwood Construction. I walked with my chest out. The staff nodded to me as I passed. "Good morning, Mr. Vance." They did not look at me with pity, they looked at me with deference. That is the currency I trade in. I took a taxi to the financial district. The sun was fully up now, reflecting off the glass towers. I looked up at the steel skeletons of the buildings. I knew the load-bearing limits of every one of them. I felt a surge of power. This was my city. Brandon and Vanessa were just tourists here living on a visa that I was about to revoke. I walked into the lobby of Solomon's building at 9 sharp. The security guard asked for ID. I handed him my license. He scanned it, and his eyebrows went up. "You have a meeting with Mr. Solomon on the 42nd floor, sir," he said. "He has cleared his schedule for you." I took the elevator up. My ears popped as we ascended. The doors opened, and I stepped onto the plush carpet of the law firm. It smelled of mahogany and money. Solomon was waiting for me in the reception area. He is a small man, sharp features, eyes like a hawk. He was wearing a 3-piece suit that probably cost more than my first house. He looked at me, and for a second he hesitated. He was looking for the broken old man he had heard on the phone at 2 a.m., but he did not find him. He found the man he used to do business with. He found the shark, Clint, he said, extending his hand. "You look ready." I shook his hand. My grip was iron. "I am not just ready, Solomon. I am impatient. Come into my office." We walked down the hallway past rows of paralegals and junior associates. They looked up as we passed. They could smell the electricity in the air. They knew something big was happening. Solomon closed the heavy oak door of his office. The view behind his desk was spectacular. Lake Michigan spread out like a sheet of hammered steel. I sat down in the leather chair opposite him. I placed the metal box on his desk. I opened it. I took out the corporate seal and placed it next to the trust documents. Solomon looked at the papers, then he looked at me. "We have run the preliminary title search, Clint," he said. "The LLC is in good standing. You are listed as the sole manager. The trust allows for immediate revocation of beneficiary rights upon your written direction. Legally, we are bulletproof." "Good," I said. "But I need to warn you, Clint. Once we file these, Brandon will be notified immediately. His lawyers, if he can afford any, will try to file an injunction. They will claim you are mentally incompetent. They will say you are acting under duress." "Let them claim it," I said. "I will take a competency test right now. I will recite the Constitution backwards if I have to. But that notice goes out today." Solomon nodded. He pushed a stack of documents toward me. "These are the sale agreements for the land. I found a buyer just like you asked. Waste Management Solutions. They have been looking for a transfer station site near the river for years. They are offering cash, $2 million for the land alone. They do not want the house. They are going to bulldoze it. I picked up the pen. It felt heavy and substantial in my hand. $2 million. It was a fair price. It was the price of my son's arrogance. I signed my name. The ink flowed black and permanent. Clint R. Vance. I looked up at Solomon. What about the eviction? The sheriff's deputies are on standby, Solomon said. We have the writ. But Clint, usually these things take 30 days. I do not have 30 days, I said. I want them out now. Solomon smiled a thin, razor-sharp smile. Well, since you are selling to an industrial buyer for immediate demolition, we can file for an emergency vacate order due to hazardous conditions. We can say the structure is unsafe. Is it unsafe? I asked. It will be once the bulldozers show up, Solomon said. Perfect. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a text from Brandon. Dad, please pick up. We are so worried. The police are coming to look for you. I showed the screen to Solomon. They called the police, I said. They are trying to file a missing persons report. They are trying to spin the narrative that I wandered off. Solomon picked up his office phone. I will call the precinct captain. I will let him know his missing person is currently sitting in my office, liquidating his assets. And Clint. Yes. We also ran a background check on your son, just to be thorough. I leaned forward. What did you find? Solomon opened a file on his desk. His face was grim. You are not going to like this. It is worse than we thought. He is not just broke, Clint. He is in trouble. Real trouble. Tell me. Solomon slid a photograph across the desk. It was a grainy surveillance photo. It showed Brandon shaking hands with a man I recognized from the old days. A man whose name you did not say out loud on a construction site unless you wanted your equipment to catch fire. Your son borrowed money from the Russo family, Solomon said quietly. $500,000, and he is 3 months behind on the VIG. I stared at the photo. My son, the MBA, the genius, the visionary, had gone to loan sharks to fund his lifestyle. He told them he was good for it, Solomon continued. He told them he had a rich father who was about to kick the bucket. He put up the house as collateral. I laughed. It was a dry, harsh sound. He put up a house he does not own as collateral for a loan he cannot pay. Exactly. When we sell this land today, Clint, when we publicize the transfer of ownership, those men are going to find out that their collateral just evaporated. They are going to come for him. I looked out the window at the cold, gray lake. I felt a flicker of the old paternal instinct, the urge to protect, the urge to fix it. But then I felt the phantom sensation of spit on my cheek. Let them come, I said. Clint, these are dangerous men, Solomon warned. I know who they are, I said. I dealt with their fathers in the 80s. I know how they operate. So you are going to let him fall. I stood up and buttoned my jacket. I smoothed the lapels of my new suit. I am not letting him fall, Solomon. I am just refusing to catch him. There is a difference. I picked up the corporate seal and put it back in my pocket. File the papers. Solomon. Sell the land. Call the sheriff. I walked to the door. Where are you going? Clint Solomon asked. I am going to pay a visit to the site, I said. I want to be there when the eviction notice is served. I want to see the look on his face when he realizes that the landlord has returned. And I want to make sure the garbage trucks know where to park. Solomon reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a second folder. This one was not manila. It was black. It was thick. It hit the mahogany desk with a heavy thud that sounded like a shovel of dirt hitting a coffin. I looked at it, and I knew before he even opened it that this was the autopsy of my family. You need to see the mechanics of it, Clint Solomon said, his voice low and devoid of emotion. You need to understand that this is not just about bad spending habits or a little bit of gambling. Your son is not running a business. He is running a sieve. He opened the file. Spread out before me were bank statements, wire transfers, and tax returns. I know how to read a balance sheet. I ran my own books for 40 years. I know what profit looks like, and I know what loss looks like. But this looked like chaos. Look at the deposits, Solomon said, pointing a manicured finger at a column of figures. Vance Ventures, his consulting firm. The one he told you was on the verge of a breakthrough with the city contracts. Look at the incoming wires. I put on my reading glasses. The numbers were large. 10,000 here, 15,000 there. All coming from shell companies with addresses in the Cayman Islands and Delaware. Now look at the outgoing, Solomon said. I followed his finger. The money came in, and within 24 hours it went right back out. It went to construction supply companies that did not exist. It went to consulting fees for people who had no online presence. It went to a holding company called R&R Logistics. R&R, I muttered. Russo and Russo. Solomon nodded. Your son is not a businessman, Clint. He is a washing machine. The Russo family is using his accounts to clean their street money. He takes a 2% cut for the risk. That is how he pays the lease on the Porsche. That is how he pays for Vanessa's trips. He is laundering money for the mob, and he is not even doing a good job of it. He is sloppy. The IRS would have flagged this in 6 months, even if we did not intervene. He was going to prison anyway, Clint. We are just accelerating the timeline. I felt a coldness spread through my chest. It was not the cold of the unheated carriage house. It was the cold of realizing that the boy I raised, the boy I taught to fish, the boy I sent to the best schools had become a low-level criminal. He was not a shark. He was the bait. And the debt, I asked. You said he owes $500,000. That is the principal, Solomon said, flipping the page. He borrowed that to buy into a crypto scheme 6 months ago. He thought he could double it and pay them back before they noticed. He lost it all in 3 days. Now he is just paying the vigorish. The interest. $10,000 a week just to keep his kneecaps intact. And he is 3 weeks behind. I stared at the numbers. They were black and white, but to me they looked like blood. My son had sold his soul for a get-rich-quick scheme. He had leveraged my name, my reputation, and my property to play gangster. There is more, Solomon said, and this part is harder. I did not think it could get harder. I was wrong. Solomon pulled out a stack of photographs. They were high-resolution surveillance shots taken with a telephoto lens. They were grainy but unmistakable. The first photo showed Vanessa. She was wearing a red dress. I recognized it. I paid for it. She was standing outside a hotel in downtown Chicago, the Palmer House. She was not alone. She was standing with a man. He was tall with silver hair and a suit that cost more than my truck. He had his hand on the small of her back. It was a familiar touch, an intimate touch. I looked closer. I knew the man. His name was Sterling. He was a developer. He was the man who had outbid Brandon for the riverfront contract last year. He was the man Brandon hated more than anyone on earth. Brandon spent hours at dinner complaining about Sterling calling him a snake, calling him a thief, and here was Vanessa kissing him. The next photo showed them in the hotel bar. They were laughing. Vanessa was holding a glass of champagne. She looked happy. She looked radiant. She looked like a woman who did not have a care in the world. Solomon slid a transcript across the desk. We intercepted her text messages, Solomon said. I have a friend at the telecom provider. It is not admissible in court, but you need to see it. I picked up the paper. My hands were steady now. The shock had burned off, leaving only ash. Message from Vanessa to Sterling. The old man is still breathing. It is taking too long. Brandon is useless. He is falling apart. As soon as the transfer goes through, I am filing for divorce. I will take my half and we can finally go to Italy. Message from Sterling. Just keep him calm, baby. Get the signature. Once the funds clear, we will leave them both in the dust. I read it twice. The old man. That was me. Useless. That was Brandon. She was not just cheating on him. She was playing him. She was using him to get to my money, and then she was going to leave him to the wolves. She knew about the debt. She knew about the mob, and she did not care. She was planning her exit strategy on the back of my son's destruction. I looked up at Solomon. He was watching me closely, gauging my reaction. She is leaving him, I said, my voice flat. As soon as she thinks the money is secure, Solomon confirmed. She has a separate account, Clint. We found it. She has been siphoning money from the household expenses for 2 years. She has a go bag packed in the trunk of her car. She is not a wife. She is a parasite looking for a new host. I looked at the photo of my son's wife kissing his rival. I looked at the bank statements showing my son washing blood money. I looked at the transcript where they discussed my death, like it was a business transaction. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the city. I built this city. I poured concrete into the mud. I welded steel in the rain. I worked honest, hard days so my family could have a better life. And this was the result. A son who was a criminal, a daughter-in-law who was a traitor, and a legacy that was built on a foundation of lies. I thought about the mercy I had felt earlier, the tiny flicker of paternal instinct. It was gone. It was extinguished. You cannot fix a house that has termites in the framing, I said to the glass. You cannot patch it. You cannot paint over it. The rot goes too deep. I turned back to Solomon. Do it, I said. Sell it all. Solomon nodded. The land sale to Waste Management is ready to sign. No, I said. Not just the land. I pointed at the file. I want you to call the bank that holds the note on Brandon's company. The legitimate one. Tell them I am withdrawing my personal guarantee. Tell them to call the loan. Solomon's eyes widened. That will bankrupt the business immediately. His assets will be frozen by noon. Good. Then I want you to send a copy of these bank statements anonymously to the IRS Criminal Division. Clint, Solomon warned. That is federal prison. That is 5 to 10 years. It is better than what the Russos will do to him, I said. Prison is safe. Prison has walls. I am saving his life, Solomon. I am putting him in a cage so the sharks cannot eat him. And Vanessa? Solomon asked. I picked up the photos of her and Sterling. I looked at her smile. Send copies of these to Brandon, I said. Now, no. Send them to him at 5 p.m., right after the eviction notice is served, right after the bank freezes his accounts, right after he realizes he has lost the house. I want him to know that when he hits the bottom, he is hitting it alone. Solomon let out a breath he had been holding. This is biblical, Clint. It is business, I said. I am liquidating a failed investment. I walked back to the desk. I picked up the black folder. I closed it. The sound was soft this time. It was the sound of a book closing. The end of a chapter. Get the broker on the line, I said. I want the cash wire transfer confirmation in my hand before lunch. I want the demolition crew on site by 2. I want the sign on the lawn by 3. Solomon reached for his phone. And Clint, he said, pausing. What about you? What are you going to do while this is burning down? I buttoned my jacket. I checked my watch. It was 10 a.m. I am going to get a sandwich, I said. And then I am going to go watch the show. I paid for the ticket, Solomon. I might as well enjoy the performance. I walked out of the office. I did not look back. I took the elevator down to the street. The sun was shining. The air was crisp. People were rushing to work, living their lives, worrying about their bills. They did not know that a hurricane was about to touch down in the suburbs. They did not know that a man was walking among them who had just signed the death warrant for his own family tree. I felt light. I felt empty. But mostly I felt clean. The rot was cut out. The wound would scar, but it would heal. I hailed a cab. "Take me to the river," I told the driver. "I want to see the water." I needed to see something that flowed, something that kept moving no matter what obstacles were in its way. Just like me. At 11 o'clock sharp, the heavy oak doors of the conference room swung open. The air in the room shifted instantly. It went from the sterile cold of a law firm to the heavy industrial weight of earth movers and diesel fuel. The man who walked in was named Slater. He was the regional director for Tri-State Waste Management. He was a man built like a bulldog in a suit that cost $2,000, but still looked like it was straining to contain him. He did not smile. He did not offer pleasantries. He walked in with the gait of a man who turns garbage into gold. Solomon stood up and buttoned his jacket. "Mr. Slater, thank you for coming on such short notice." Slater grunted. He shook Solomon's hand, then he turned to me. His grip was like a vice grip wrapped in sandpaper. He looked at my hands. He saw the calluses. He saw the scars. He nodded once. A mark of respect from one man who works with the dirt to another. "Mr. Vance," he said, "I understand we have a unique situation here. Immediate possession. Immediate demolition. Cash on the barrelhead." "That is correct," I said. "I want the structures leveled. I want the ground flat. I want the trucks rolling in by tomorrow." Slater sat down and opened a folder. He pulled out a check. It was a cashier's check. Certified funds. It sat on the polished mahogany table, green and unassuming. $2.2 million. It was more money than my son had ever earned in his life. It was the price of his arrogance. "We have been trying to get a foothold in that zoning district for 5 years, Slater said, tapping the check. "The city council fought us. The neighbors fought us. But since you own the mineral rights and the industrial variants from the original 1980 deed," he trailed off and actually smiled a wolfish grin. "It is a loophole you could drive a garbage truck through. We are going to put a transfer station right where your rose garden is. The neighbors are going to hate it." "I do not care about the neighbors," I said. "They watched my son treat me like a dog for 10 years and said nothing. Let them smell the trash." Solomon slid the deed across the table. It was the original deed, the one I had kept safe in the metal box under my floorboards. It was yellowed at the edges. It represented 40 years of sweat. It represented the weekends I missed working overtime. It represented the college fund I never spent on myself. I picked up the pen. It was a Mont Blanc, heavy and black. I looked at the signature line. Grantor Clint R. Vance. For a second, my hand hovered over the paper. I thought about the Christmas mornings in that house. I thought about the height chart penciled on the doorframe of the kitchen pantry, marking Brandon's growth from a toddler to a man. I was about to sign away the physical evidence that we were ever a family. Then I remembered the cold radiator. I remembered the locksmith drilling out the lock. I remembered the conversation about the cheapest nursing home bed available. I pressed the pen to the paper. The ink flowed smooth and dark. I signed my name. I did not tremble. I did not hesitate. With that stroke of the pen, the house ceased to be a home. It became an industrial asset. It became property of the Waste Management Corporation. Slater countersigned. He pushed the check toward me. "Done," he said. "My crews are staging 3 blocks away. We have the permits. We have the demolition order. As soon as the sheriff clears the building." We start swinging the wrecking balls. Solomon picked up his phone. He dialed a number and put it on speaker. Sheriff's Dispatch. This is Attorney Solomon representing the new property owners of 1242 Lakeview Drive. We have a writ of immediate possession and an emergency vacate order due to hazardous structural conditions pending demolition. We need a civil standby for the removal of squatters. I heard the dispatcher typing on the other end. Roger that, counselor. We have deputies in the vicinity. They can be there in 20 minutes. Are the occupants hostile? I leaned toward the phone. They will be, I said. They will be very hostile. Dispatch copy. We will send 2 units. Solomon hung up. He looked at me. The wire transfer for the business accounts has cleared, Clint. The bank called the loan on Brandon's company 10 minutes ago. His corporate accounts are frozen. His personal accounts are frozen. The credit cards are dead. He is currently swiping a piece of plastic at a gas station somewhere that is worth less than the ice scraper in his glove box. And the IRS, I asked. The packet was delivered by courier this morning, Solomon said. The forensic accounting team at the district attorney's office has it too. The clock is ticking on his freedom. I stood up. I picked up the check and folded it into my inside pocket. It felt warm against my chest. Thank you, Solomon, Clint Slater said, standing up as well. You understand that once we start, there is no going back. We strip the copper. We crush the foundation. We fill the pool with rubble. It will be a hole in the ground by sunset. Make it a deep hole, I said. Bury it all. I walked out of the conference room. The receptionist looked up at me. She smiled. She did not know that I had just nuked my own legacy. She did not know that I was a father who had just sold his son's roof to a garbage man. I took the elevator down to the lobby. The world outside was bright and loud. The city was moving. People were eating lunch. They were laughing. They were living in a world where fathers loved sons and sons respected fathers. I was no longer a citizen of that world. I was in exile. I hailed a cab. The driver was a young man with a turban and a kind face. Where to, sir? He asked. 1242 Lakeview Drive, I said. And step on it. I have a date with a bulldozer. We drove north along the lake. The water was choppy gray waves capping with white foam. I watched the city scroll by. I saw the buildings I had helped build. The stadium, the hospital, the high-rises. I had left my mark on this city in steel and stone. But my greatest construction project, my family, had been a failure due to poor materials. I had used love where I should have used discipline. I had used generosity where I should have used boundaries. Now I was going to use dynamite. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from my old bank app, which I still had access to because Brandon was too lazy to change the secondary passwords. Alert transaction declined. Starbucks. $6.45. I smiled. It was starting. He was trying to buy a coffee and the machine was telling him the truth for the first time in his life. He was broke. He just didn't know the extent of it yet. He probably thought it was a glitch. He probably yelled at the barista. He probably pulled out another card. Alert transaction declined. Visa Platinum. $6.45. He was finding out that the well had run dry. He was about to come home to complain to Vanessa. He was about to come home to demand that I fix it. But when he got home, he would not find his father. He would find 2 sheriff's deputies and a man named Slater who wanted to park a dumpster in his living room. The cab turned onto Lakeview Drive. I saw them in the distance. The flashing blue lights of the police cruisers. The heavy yellow machinery of the demolition crew idling on the side street like beasts waiting to feed. I saw the house. It looked majestic in the afternoon sun. The brickwork I laid with my own hands. The slate roof I installed during the blizzard of '99. It looked permanent. It looked safe. It was a lie. The cab stopped across the street. I paid the driver and stepped out. I adjusted my cuffs. I straightened my tie. I crossed the street not as a resident, but as the executioner. The deputies were already at the gate cutting the chain Brandon had put up to keep me out. The irony was bitter. He locked the gate to keep me from getting in, and now the law was cutting it to throw him out. I stood on the sidewalk and waited. I wanted to be the first thing he saw when he pulled into the driveway. I wanted him to see the new suit. I wanted him to see the clear eyes. I wanted him to see that the man he spit on had returned not to wipe his face but to wash the slate clean. In the distance I heard the roar of a Porsche engine. He was coming. He was driving fast, angry, probably screaming into his hands-free phone about the declined coffee. He was racing toward a finish line he did not know had been moved. I checked my watch. 1 p.m. The show was about to begin. I stood on the sidewalk across the street, shielded by the shadow of an old oak tree I had planted 30 years ago. From my vantage point, I had a perfect view of the stage my son had set for his own funeral. The Porsche screeched into the driveway moments after I arrived. Brandon did not notice the cut chain on the gate. He was too busy screaming into his Bluetooth earpiece, probably berating some poor bank teller about his frozen accounts. He slammed the car door and stormed into the house, oblivious to the fact that he was walking into a building he no longer owned. Within an hour, the transformation began. Catering vans arrived. Not the ones I used to hire for family barbecues, but high-end, sleek, black vans with logos I did not recognize. Waiters in white tuxedos began setting up tables on the lawn right over the spot where the septic tank access was buried. I almost laughed. It was poetic. They were setting up a feast on top of waste. Cars began to arrive. These were not family cars. These were aggressive cars. Matte black SUVs with tinted windows. Low-slung sports cars that looked like sharks on wheels. The people stepping out of them did not look like friends. They looked like predators. Men in suits that were too tight, wearing sunglasses even though the sun was dipping behind the clouds. Women with frozen faces and eyes that scanned the property, appraising its liquidation value. I recognized one of them. Tony the Ant Russo. He was the nephew of the man I used to know. He walked with a limp and carried a cane that looked heavy enough to break a femur. He stopped on the front steps and looked up at the house. He nodded slowly. He was calculating his return on investment. He thought he owned a piece of this. He thought he had a lien on the bricks I laid. He did not know that the paper in his pocket was worth less than the napkin he would soon wipe his mouth with. The music started. It was loud thumping bass that rattled the windows. I saw Vanessa come out onto the terrace. She was wearing a silver dress that shimmered like fish scales. She held a glass of champagne high, laughing at something Tony Russo said. She looked relieved. She thought the problem was solved. She thought I was currently being strapped into a bed in a ward, 3 towns away, medicated into oblivion. She thought the silence from the carriage house meant victory. I watched Brandon moving through the crowd. He was manic. He was sweating through his dress shirt. He moved from group to group, shaking hands too vigorously, laughing too loudly. I could read his body language from 50 yards away. He was pleading. He was selling a dream that had already defaulted. I imagined what he was saying to them. The transfer is happening today. My father is retired. He is resting. The capital will be released by Monday. He was building a house of cards in the middle of a hurricane. He was promising money he did not have to people who did not accept apologies. He checked his phone constantly. He was waiting for the confirmation call from the nursing home. He was waiting for the text saying, "Subject secured." But the phone remained silent. Every time he looked at the screen, a flicker of panic crossed his face. Why hadn't they called? Why was there no confirmation? But he pushed it down. He took another drink. He slapped another back. He had to believe the lie because the truth was too terrifying to face. The party spilled out onto the lawn. Waiters passed around trays of hors d'oeuvres that cost more than a week's worth of groceries. Brandon climbed onto a small dais they had set up near the pool. He grabbed a microphone. The feedback squealed, piercing the air. "Welcome, everyone," he shouted, his voice cracking slightly. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. Today marks a new chapter, a new era for Vance Ventures." The crowd clapped politely, but their eyes were cold. They were not there to celebrate. They were there to collect. Russo leaned on his cane, staring at Brandon like a butcher staring at a cow. "My father," Brandon continued, gesturing vaguely toward the carriage house, "has decided to step down. He has passed the torch. Due to health reasons, he could not be here tonight, but he sends his blessing. He knows the legacy is in good hands." I clenched my fists in my pockets. His blessing. He had stolen my money, he had tried to steal my freedom, and now he was stealing my voice. He was using my name to buy himself time with sharks. He raised his glass. "To the future." "To the money," Russo shouted back. His voice was deep and gravelly. It was not a toast. It was a demand. Everyone drank. Brandon downed his glass in one gulp. He looked steady for a moment, buoyed by the alcohol and the adrenaline of the lie. He looked around his kingdom, the manicured lawn, the sparkling pool, the majestic brick facade. He felt like a king. He did not see the two sheriff's cruisers turning the corner at the end of the block, their lights silent but flashing. He did not see the massive yellow excavator rumbling down the street behind them, its treads chewing up the asphalt, its steel bucket gleaming like the jaw of a monster. He did not see the white pickup truck with the Tri-State Waste Management logo pulling up to the curb. And he certainly did not see me stepping off the sidewalk, adjusting my tie, and walking toward the open gate. The music was still thumping. The champagne was still flowing. But the atmosphere shifted. A few guests near the gate stopped talking. They looked at the police cars. They looked at the heavy machinery blocking the road. The chatter died down in waves spreading from the entrance toward the pool. Brandon was still on the dais, pouring himself another drink. He did not notice the silence spreading until it was right in front of him. He looked up, he frowned. He followed the gaze of his guests. He saw the deputies walking up the driveway, hands on their belts. He saw Slater, the demolition foreman, walking beside them holding a clipboard. And then he saw me. I was walking 10 paces behind the police. I was not hiding. I was walking down the center of the driveway. The afternoon sun hit my new suit. I saw his eyes widen. I saw the glass slip from his fingers. It hit the patio stones and shattered. "Dad," he mouthed. He looked at the carriage house where I was supposed to be locked up. Then he looked back at me. He looked at the police. He looked at the excavator that was now idling loudly at the gate, its diesel engine roaring over the music. Vanessa dropped her hors d'oeuvre. Her hand flew to her mouth. She looked at me and she saw the man she thought she had buried. She saw the ghost returning to the feast. Tony Russo turned slowly. He looked at the police. He looked at Brandon. And then he smiled. It was a terrifying smile. He knew the game was up before anyone else did. He backed away into the shadows of the garden, disappearing like smoke. I stopped at the edge of the patio. The guests parted for me like the Red Sea. They smelled the power shifting. They smelled the authority. Brandon stumbled down from the dais. "Dad, what are you doing here?" he stammered, his voice trembling. "You are supposed to be... You are sick." "I am not sick, Brandon," I said, my voice carrying across the silent yard. "And I am not retired." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the eviction notice. It was a single sheet of paper stamped with the court's seal. "I am the landlord, and your lease has expired." The deputies stepped forward. Brandon Vance, the lead officer, asked. "Yes," Brandon squeaked. "We have a court order for immediate vacation of the premises. This property has been sold for demolition. You have 10 minutes to remove your person from the grounds." "Sold," Brandon screamed. He looked at me wild-eyed. "You cannot sell it. It is my house." I stepped closer to him. I was close enough to smell the fear on him. "It was never your house, son," I said quietly, so only he could hear. "It was my house. You were just a squatter who forgot to pay the rent of respect." I signaled to Slater. He waved his hand. The excavator revved its engine. A cloud of black smoke shot into the air. The hydraulic arm lifted the bucket high, blotting out the sun. The party was over. The demolition had begun. And the first thing to crumble was my son's ego. The roar of the diesel engine cut through the afternoon like a chainsaw through a wedding cake. The massive yellow excavator lurched forward, its steel tracks grinding the asphalt of the driveway into dust. The sound was deafening, a mechanical scream that drowned out the thumping bass of the party music and the clinking of champagne glasses. The ground shook. I could feel the vibrations through the soles of my new shoes. It was a feeling I had missed, the feeling of raw power moving earth, the feeling of change happening, whether the earth wanted it or not. The guests scattered. Women in high heels stumbled backward, their faces twisted in confusion and fear. Men in expensive suits dropped their hors d'oeuvres and covered their ears. The carefully curated atmosphere of exclusivity and luxury evaporated in an instant, replaced by the harsh, brutal reality of a construction site. The smell of exhaust fumes drifted across the manicured lawn, mixing with the scent of expensive perfume and fear. Brandon stood frozen at the foot of the dais. His mouth was open, but no sound came out. He looked at the machine looming over his party like a yellow dragon. He looked at the sheriff's deputies who were calmly standing with their arms crossed, watching the chaos unfold. And then he looked at me. I walked past him. I did not stop to explain. I walked straight toward the excavator. Slater, the foreman, was hanging off the side of the cab, holding something in his hand. As I approached, he jumped down, his heavy boots thudding against the pavement. He held out a white hard hat. It was not new. It was scuffed and scratched, the plastic yellowed with age. It was my old hard hat, the one I had worn when I poured the foundation for this very house. I had left it in the carriage house, and Slater had retrieved it for me. I took the hat. It felt light in my hands, but heavy with history. I placed it on my head. I adjusted the strap. In that moment, the transformation was complete. I was no longer the guest. I was no longer the father. I was the job site supervisor, and this was my project. I climbed up the metal rungs on the side of the excavator. My joints protested, but adrenaline pushed me upward. I stood on the platform next to the cab, elevated 6 feet above the crowd. I looked down at them. From this height, they all looked small. They looked like ants scrambling because someone had kicked their hill. I signaled the operator to cut the engine. The machine shuddered and fell silent. The sudden quiet was heavy. It rang in the ears. All eyes were on me. The guests, the loan sharks, the servers, and my son. They were all looking up at the old man in the navy suit and the construction helmet. Brandon found his voice. He ran toward the machine, his face purple with rage and humiliation. "Get down from there," he screamed, his voice cracking. "You are crazy. Get down before you hurt yourself. This is my property. I am calling the police." The lead deputy stepped forward. He did not move with urgency. He moved with the tired patience of a man who has seen too many domestic disputes. "We are already here, Mr. Vance," the deputy said, his voice calm and carrying across the yard. "And according to the paperwork in my hand, this is not your property." Brandon spun around, wild-eyed. "He is lying. He is senile. He tricked you. I have the deed. It is in the trust." I leaned over the railing of the excavator. "The trust," I said, my voice booming over the yard without the need for a microphone. "Let's talk about the trust, Brandon." I saw the guests leaning in. They smelled blood. These were people who understood money. They understood contracts. They understood that when the police stand down and the demolition crew stands up, something catastrophic has happened to the ledger. You told everyone here that this was your house, I said. You told the bank it was your house. You told the Russo family it was your house. I pointed a finger at Tony Russo, who was standing by the rose bushes, leaning on his cane, watching me with narrowed eyes. But you never read the documents, did you, son? You were too busy picking out the marble for the foyer. You were too busy planning the pool parties. You signed the land trust agreement number 8492. Do you remember that? Brandon stammered. I signed. I am the beneficiary. You were the beneficiary, I corrected him, past tense. But you forgot Article 7, the power of direction. The trust holds the title Brandon, but I hold the trust. I am the grantor, and I am the manager of the LLC that pays the taxes. You were just living here. You were a tenant with a $0 lease, a lease that required you to maintain the property and maintain a standard of conduct. Conduct, he shrieked. He was unraveling. His hands were shaking so hard, he looked like he was vibrating. What conduct? I am the CEO. I ran this family. You ran nothing, I said. You ran up debts. You ran your mouth. And last night at dinner you violated the conduct clause. I touched my cheek. The gesture was small but significant. You spit on the landlord, Brandon. And in my book, that is a breach of contract. A gasp went through the crowd. I saw Vanessa freeze. She was standing near the patio doors, clutching her purse. She knew. She understood the legal reality before he did, because she had been plotting to circumvent it for years. She realized in that second that she had bet on the wrong horse. She had married the tenant when she should have respected the owner. That is insane, Brandon yelled. You cannot do this. This is my home. My wife lives here. My things are in there. Not anymore, I said. I exercised my right to revoke your beneficial interest at 6 a.m. this morning. The trust has been dissolved. The assets have reverted to me. And at 9 a.m. I sold the land. I pointed to Slater, who was standing by the tracks of the machine arms, crossed a grim smile on his face. Meet the new owner, Brandon. Tri-State Waste Management. They bought the dirt. They did not buy the house. In fact, they consider the house an obstruction, a hazard. They want it gone. Brandon looked at Slater. He looked at the machine. He looked back at me. The reality was starting to sink in, but his ego was fighting it. His ego was a fortress he had built to protect himself from his own mediocrity, and it was refusing to crumble. You sold it, he whispered. You sold my inheritance. It was never your inheritance, I said. Inheritance is what is left over after the parents are done with it. It is a gift, not a right. And you do not give gifts to people who treat you like garbage. So I sold it to the garbage men. It seemed appropriate. The guests started to whisper. I could hear the murmur rising. They were not looking at Brandon with admiration anymore. They were looking at him like he was a contagion. They were checking their watches. They were backing away toward their cars. They realized that the free champagne had a price tag attached to it, and they did not want to be around when the bill came due. Brandon looked around frantically. He saw his kingdom collapsing. He saw his friends abandoning him. He saw the loan sharks watching him. He needed to regain control. He needed to win the crowd back. He is lying, he shouted, turning to the guests, his arms spread wide. My father is sick. He has dementia. He belongs in a home. He does not know what he is saying. I have the power of attorney. I have the medical records. I reached into my inside jacket pocket. I pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was the affidavit from my doctor, signed and notarized an hour ago, declaring me fully competent. I held it up. I am not the one who is sick, Brandon. And I am not the one who is broke. I looked at the crowd. My son invited you all here to celebrate a new chapter, I said. He told you capital was coming. He told you the future was bright. He lied. I pointed at the house. There is no capital. The bank accounts are frozen. The credit cards are dead. The IRS has the books. And this house is about to be a pile of bricks. Vanessa screamed. It was a high, piercing sound. She ran toward Brandon and started hitting him. She pummeled his chest with her fists, her nails tearing at his shirt. "You idiot," she screamed. "You told me it was handled. You told me he was gone. You promised me." Brandon tried to push her away, but she was hysterical. She was seeing her trip to Italy vanish. She was seeing her escape plan disintegrate. "He lied to you too, Vanessa," I said, my voice cutting through her screams. "But you are no victim. You were the one who called the nursing home. You were the one who asked for the cheapest bed. You were the one who wanted to put me in restraints." I looked down at her. She stopped hitting Brandon and looked up at me, her mascara running down her face. "So grab your purse, Vanessa. Grab whatever you can carry in your hands, because in 5 minutes, this excavator is going through the front door, and anything inside belongs to the landfill." The deputies stepped forward then. "Folks," the lead deputy said, addressing the crowd, "this is now an active demolition zone. It is unsafe. You all need to clear the area immediately. Please move your vehicles to the street. If you are parked in the driveway, move now or you will be towed." The panic set in. It was not a stampede, but it was close. The beautiful people in their beautiful clothes scrambled. They ran for their Porsches and their Mercedes. Engines roared to life. Tires squealed on the pavement. No one said goodbye to Brandon. No one thanked him for the party. They fled the scene of the disaster as fast as their high-performance engines could carry them. Brandon stood alone in the middle of the driveway. Vanessa had run into the house, presumably to grab her jewelry box before the walls came down. Brandon looked small. He looked like a child who had lost his mother in the supermarket. He looked up at me, still standing on the machine. "Dad," he said. His voice was small now, stripped of all the bluster. "Dad, please. You cannot do this." "Where will we go?" I looked at him. I looked at the man who had sat across from me last night and told me I was nothing. I looked at the man who had spit on me. "I do not know, Brandon," I said. "Maybe you can go to that nursing home you picked out for me. I hear they have beds available in the shared ward. It is the cheapest option. You should be able to afford it." I turned to the operator. "Fire it up," I said. The diesel engine roared back to life. A cloud of black smoke shot into the clear blue sky. The operator pulled the levers. The hydraulic arm lifted. The bucket curled inward like a fist. Brandon scrambled back, tripping over his own feet, falling onto the grass. He crawled backward, his eyes fixed on the metal teeth of the bucket. "Wait!" he screamed. "Wait, my watch, my collection!" I signaled Slater. Slater blew a whistle. "Clear the zone," he shouted. "Demolition in 3, 2, 1. The operator swung the arm. The machine pivoted on its tracks. The bucket smashed into the brick pillar of the front gate. The ornate ironwork twisted like a pipe cleaner. The brick exploded, showering the driveway with dust and debris. It was the first blow. It was the opening note of a symphony of destruction. "Get him off the property!" I shouted to the deputies, pointing at Brandon. 2 deputies grabbed Brandon by the arms. He fought them, kicking and screaming, but they dragged him back toward the street. He was not the owner anymore. He was a trespasser. He was an obstruction. I watched from my perch on the machine. I felt the vibrations in my bones. I saw Vanessa running out the front door, clutching a Louis Vuitton bag and a jewelry box, screaming as the dust cloud rolled over her. I did not feel sad. I did not feel regret. I felt the satisfaction of a job well done. I was taking it apart. I was unmaking the mistake I had made. I was reclaiming the raw materials of my life. I looked at the house one last time. It stood there, proud and tall, unaware that its skeleton was about to be crushed. "Take the roof off," I said to the operator. "Let some light in." The arm swung again, and the destruction began in earnest. The dust from the shattered gate was still hanging in the air, a fine red mist of pulverized brick that coated the expensive cars and the terrified faces of the few guests who had not yet fled. The silence that followed the initial crash was heavy, broken only by the hydraulic hiss of the excavator's arm retracting and the frantic sobbing of my daughter-in-law. Vanessa was standing at the edge of the police line, her hands gripping the yellow caution tape that the deputies were now stringing up across the driveway. She looked like a woman watching a ship sink while realizing she had left her life jacket in the stateroom. She was screaming, but it was not for her husband. It was not for her marriage. It was for her closet. My bags, she shrieked, her voice shredding the afternoon air. My Birkins, my jewelry. You cannot destroy them. They are in the master suite. Let me go back in. She tried to duck under the tape. A deputy caught her by the arm. He was a big man, with a face carved out of granite, and he did not have patience for hysterics. Ma'am, you need to step back, he said firmly. This is a condemned structure. No one enters. You do not understand, she yelled, clawing at his uniform. There is $50,000 worth of handbags in there, my grandmother's pearls, my shoe collection. It is all debris now, ma'am, the deputy said, pushing her back toward the street. It is unsafe. The demolition order is immediate. Anything inside is considered hazardous waste. Hazardous waste. I watched from the cab of the machine and I felt a cold, grim smile touch my lips. That was exactly what those things were. They were hazardous because they were bought with dirty money. They were bought with the proceeds of my son's laundering schemes and my stolen retirement funds. They were toxic assets, and they were about to be buried. Brandon was sitting on the curb, his head in his hands. He was watching his wife fight for a piece of leather while his entire world collapsed. He looked up at me. His face was streaked with tears and dust. He looked at the house. He looked at the gaping hole where the gate used to be, and then he looked past the police line toward the street. I followed his gaze. The black SUVs had not left. The loan sharks had not fled with the rest of the socialites. They had simply moved their vehicles to the other side of the road, parking facing the house like a funeral procession. The tinted windows were rolled up, but I knew who was inside. I knew what they were doing. They were calculating. Tony Russo was leaning against the hood of the lead car. He was cleaning his fingernails with a small knife. He was not looking at the house. He was looking directly at Brandon. I saw the color drain from my son's face. It was a white so pure it looked like primer paint. He realized in that second that the sheriff's deputies were not his biggest problem. The police would arrest him. The police would put him in a cell. But the police have rules. The men across the street did not have rules. They had a ledger, and Brandon was in the red. He stood up shakily. He took a step toward the deputies almost as if he wanted to turn himself in just to get into the safety of a squad car. But he stopped. He was trapped. Trapped between the law that wanted his freedom, the father who had taken his shelter, and the criminals who wanted his blood. I turned my attention back to the house. The structure stood there defiant. It was a beautiful house. I had designed it to be timeless. I had chosen the limestone for the portico myself, hand-picking the slabs from a quarry in Indiana. I had wanted it to be a monument to our family name. Instead, it had become a mausoleum for their greed. I tapped the roof of the cab. The operator looked up at me through the safety glass. I pointed at the portico. The grand entrance with the 2-story columns that Vanessa loved to pose in front of for her social media photos. Bring it down, I signaled. The operator nodded. He pulled the levers. The machine groaned. The steel tracks bit into the lawn, tearing up the sod I had laid 10 years ago. The excavator pivoted. The boom extended, reaching out like the hand of judgment. The bucket teeth slammed into the first limestone column. It did not crumble immediately. It resisted. It was built well. But steel is stronger than stone. The operator applied more pressure. The hydraulic rams hissed, And then, with a sound like a gunshot, the column snapped. The roof of the portico sagged. The second column buckled under the weight. The entire structure groaned a low, mournful sound of wood and stone giving way. Then it collapsed. Tons of debris crashed onto the front steps, blocking the front door forever. A cloud of white dust billowed up, covering the windows, coating the pristine brick. Vanessa screamed again. It was a sound of pure agony, as if she felt the blow in her own body. She fell to her knees on the asphalt, ruining her silver dress. "My life," she wailed. "My life is in there." "No, Vanessa," I thought. "Your things are in there. Your life is right here on the pavement. And it is empty." Slater, the foreman, walked over to the pile of rubble. He waved to the other machines that were now rolling off the flatbeds down the street. A bulldozer and a second excavator. The cavalry had arrived. "Strip the copper first," Slater yelled to his crew, ignoring the screaming woman and the crying man. "Then flatten it. I want the foundation crushed by 6 o'clock." I climbed down from the machine. My legs felt heavy but steady. I walked past the deputies who were busy keeping the growing crowd of neighbors back. The neighbors were filming with their phones, whispering, pointing. They were witnessing the fall of the House of Vance. I walked up to where Brandon and Vanessa were huddled. They looked like refugees from a war zone. Vanessa's makeup was running in black streaks down her face. Brandon's suit was torn at the shoulder. They looked up at me. For the first time in 10 years, they did not look down on me. They looked up with fear, with awe, with the realization that they had poked a sleeping bear, and the bear had woken up hungry. "Dad," Brandon whispered. "Dad, please. The Russo brothers. They are watching. They are going to kill me. You took away the collateral." I looked across the street at Tony Russo. He tipped his head at me, acknowledging the play. "Game recognized game." "You borrowed the money, Brandon," I said, my voice cold and hard as the concrete I used to pour. "You spent the money. You lied about the collateral. That is between you and your business partners. But I don't have it," he cried, grabbing the hem of my jacket. "I don't have a doom. You froze the accounts." I pulled my jacket free from his grasp. I brushed the spot where he had touched me. "Then I guess you better start looking for a job," I said. "I hear the state is hiring people to pick up trash on the highway. It pays minimum wage, but it is honest work. Something you know nothing about." Vanessa stood up. She wiped her face. Her eyes were hard again. The shock was wearing off, replaced by the survival instinct of a parasite. "You old bastard," she hissed. "You think you won? You just made your son a target. His blood will be on your hands." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had whispered in my son's ear was for a decade poisoning him against me. The woman who had planned to lock me away and drug me into silence. "His blood is his own," I said, "just like my money is my own. And as for you, Vanessa, I suggest you start running. Because when the IRS gets through with the audit of those credit cards, you maxed out in my name. You are going to wish the Russos were the ones looking for you. Federal prison is not as nice as the country club." She blanched. She looked at Brandon, then at the police, then at the road. She made a calculation. I saw it happen in her eyes. She realized Brandon was a sinking ship, and she was not going down with him. She turned to Brandon. "I am leaving," she said. "What?" Brandon asked, blinking. "Where away from you?" she spat. "You are broke. You are in debt to the mob, and your father hates you. You are useless to me." She turned and started walking down the street, her high heels clicking on the pavement, her silver dress shimmering in the dust-filled air. She did not look back. Brandon watched her go. He watched his wife, his partner, his co-conspirator, walk away without a backward glance. He was alone, truly alone. He looked at me. He looked at the house that was now being torn apart, piece by piece. The bulldozer was pushing the rubble of the portico into the front hallway. The sound of glass shattering echoed from inside. "I have nothing," he whispered. I looked at the spit stain on my soul. "You have exactly what you earned, son," I said. I turned my back on him. I walked toward the sheriff's cruiser. I needed a ride to the airport. My work here was done. The demolition was underway. The vermin were scattering. The ground was being cleared. I had destroyed the house, but I had saved my dignity. And as the sun began to set over the ruins of my former life, casting long shadows over the debris, I felt a strange sense of peace. It was finished. The dust from the demolition had settled onto the shoulders of my son's ruined suit, coating his hair, and making him look prematurely gray, like a ghost of the man he thought he was. He stood on the curb of the street that was no longer his address, staring at the gaping hole where the front door used to be. The demolition crew was efficient. They were not just knocking it down, they were erasing it. The house was already a skeleton, its ribs of timber exposed to the sky, the grandeur stripped away to reveal the common materials underneath. Vanessa stood 5 feet away from him. The physical distance was small, but the emotional distance was an ocean. She looked at the rubble, then she looked at the black SUVs parked across the street where the sharks were waiting. She did the math. She was always good at math when it involved subtraction. She turned to Brandon. "You are a Cancer," she said. Her voice was not loud. It was a flat statement of fact, devoid of the hysteria she had shown moments ago. "I wasted 10 years on a fraud." Brandon reached for her hand, his fingers trembling. "Vanessa, please," he begged, his voice cracking with desperation. "We can fix this. We can go to your parents. We can stay at their summer house until I liquidate the other assets." She slapped his hand away with a violence that shocked even me. "My parents," she spat. "My parents think you are a success, Brandon. They think you are a provider. When they find out you are a broke money launderer who lost his father's fortune, they will lock the door before you can even ring the bell. Do not follow me. If you come near me, I will call the police and I will tell them everything I know about the offshore accounts. I will turn state's witness so fast, your head will spin." She turned on her heel. The silver dress was torn at the hem, stained with the red dust of the crushed bricks. She began walking down the center of the street, past the neighbors who stood in their driveways with their phones raised, recording the downfall of the Queen Bee. She walked with her head high, pretending she was walking a runway instead of a walk of shame. She did not look back. Not once. She abandoned the sinking ship without a second thought for the captain. Brandon watched her go until she turned the corner. He looked lost. He looked small. Then he slowly turned his head and looked across the street. Tony Russo was leaning against the hood of the lead car. He lit a cigarette, the flame of his lighter flaring in the twilight. He did not move toward Brandon. He just watched. He was patient. He knew Brandon had nowhere to go. He knew the collateral was gone and now the debt was personal. Brandon panicked. The reality of the debt crashed down on him heavier than the roof of the house. He spun around, looking for a life raft. He scanned the crowd of onlookers, seeing only judgment and curiosity. Then he saw me. I was standing by the open door of the sheriff's cruiser. The deputy had offered me a ride to the main road where I could catch a cab to the airport. I was adjusting my cuffs, preparing to leave the wreckage behind. "Dad," he screamed. It was a primal sound, a sound of pure terror. He started running. He tripped over a piece of masonry, tearing his pants at the knee, but he scrambled up and kept coming. "Dad, wait. Don't leave me here." I stopped. I put a hand on the car door and waited. I wanted to hear it. I wanted to see if there was anything left of the man I tried to raise, or if he was completely consumed by the monster he had become. He reached me breathless, sweating, shaking from the adrenaline and the fear. He grabbed the lapels of my new navy suit with his dirty hands, leaving smudges on the fabric. "Please," he sobbed. He dropped to his knees right there on the asphalt. He did not care about the neighbors watching. He did not care about his dignity. He knelt in the grit and looked up at me with tears streaming down his face, creating clean tracks through the dust. "Dad, I am sorry. I was drunk last night. I was stressed. You know that was not me. I love you, Dad. You are my father. You cannot leave me with them. Look at them. They are going to kill me." I looked down at him. I looked at the top of his head, where his hair was thinning just like mine. I remembered the day he was born. I remembered holding him in the hospital, promising to protect him from the world. I remembered teaching him to tie his shoes. I remembered paying for his mistakes time and time again. But then I remembered the dinner. I remembered the cold look in his eyes when he told me I was nothing. I remembered the sensation of his spit hitting my face. I looked at his eyes now. They were wide and pleading, but behind the tears I saw the calculation. He was not sorry he spit on me. He was sorry I had the power to wipe him out. He was performing. It was the same act he used when he broke a window as a child. The same act he used when he crashed his first car. Daddy, fix it. Daddy, make the bad thing go away. But I was out of tools, and I was out of patience. The love I had for him was still there, buried deep under layers of scar tissue, but it was a cold love now, a distant love. It was the love you have for a memory, not a living thing. I reached down. For a second, he thought I was going to pull him up. He thought I was going to hug him and write a check and make the bad men go away. A spark of hope lit up his face. But I did not grab his hand. I grabbed his wrists and removed his dirty hands from my clean suit. I pushed him back gently but firmly. "You do not love me, son," I said, my voice soft but clear enough for the deputies to hear. "You love what I can do for you. You love the safety I provide. You love the money I earned. But safety is expensive, Brandon, and your credit is no good here anymore." I stepped back. He tried to grab my leg like a drowning man grabbing an anchor. "Dad, please," he wailed. "They will break my legs. They will kill me. You have the money. You have the check in your pocket. Just pay them. Save me one last time." I touched the pocket where the cashier's check sat warm against my chest. $2 million. It could save him. It could make the Russos go away. It could buy him another chance to spit on me. I looked past him at the black SUVs. I looked at Russo. Russo flicked his cigarette onto the pavement and crushed it with his heel. He tipped his chin at me, acknowledging the situation. "That is a conversation you need to have with your creditors, Brandon," I said. "I am just the landlord, and I have a plane to catch." I got into the cruiser. I pulled the door shut. Brandon lunged for the handle, but the deputy blocked him. "Step back, sir," the deputy said. Brandon pounded on the window. "Dad! Dad, open the door." I looked at him through the glass. I looked at his distorted face, his open mouth, his tears. I felt a pang of sorrow, but it was brief. It was the sorrow you feel when you finish a book that had a sad ending. You close the cover and you put it on the shelf. I tapped the glass. I pointed to my cheek, the spot where he had marked me. He froze. He understood. He realized that the stain he left was permanent. "Drive," I said to the deputy. The car pulled away. I watched him in the side mirror. He was still kneeling in the road, a small dark figure against the backdrop of the yellow excavators tearing down his life. He was alone, and for the first time in his life he was going to have to stand up by himself. The silence in the back of the taxi was absolute. The driver did not ask me about the flashing lights behind us. He did not ask about the dust on my shoes. He just drove toward O'Hare Airport, merging onto the highway that cut through the city I had spent my life building. I watched the skyline pass by. The steel and glass towers stood tall against the darkening sky, monuments to hard work and engineering. I had added my own bricks to this city, but the monument I had tried to build at 1242 Lakeview Drive was now just a pile of rubble. I raised my hand to my face. I touched my left cheek just below the eye. The skin was dry. The physical evidence of my son's disrespect had been washed away in the locker room shower hours ago. But the phantom sensation remained. It was a cold, wet mark that had burned through 40 years of fatherhood. People tell you that blood is thicker than water. They tell you that a parent's love is unconditional. They are wrong. Love is a structure. It requires maintenance. It requires a foundation of respect. If you stop maintaining it, the roof leaks. If you undermine the foundation, the walls crack. And if you spit on the builder, the structure is condemned. Brandon had spent 10 years chipping away at the mortar. He had taken my money. He had taken my dignity. He had taken my warmth. But that moment in the restaurant, that glob of saliva hitting my face was the wrecking ball. It was the moment the contract was voided. I did not hate him. You do not hate a building that collapses because of poor materials. You just clear the site and move on. I arrived at the international terminal. I walked up to the ticket counter. The agent looked at my new suit and my calm demeanor. "Where are you headed today, sir?" she asked. "Rome," I said. "Rome, Italy." My wife and I had talked about going there for 20 years. We were going to see the Colosseum. We were going to see the Pantheon. We were going to look at structures that had stood for 2,000 years because they were built right. We never went. We were too busy paying for Brandon's tuition, too busy paying for Brandon's wedding, too busy bailing Brandon out. "When would you like to return?" the agent asked, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. I looked at the departure board. I looked at the sea of strangers rushing to get home. I realized I had no home to go back to. I had sold the land. I had emptied the accounts. I was a man with a suitcase full of cash and a heart full of dust. "One way," I said. She paused, then typed it in. "First class. One way to Rome." I walked through security. I did not look back at the city. I did not look at my phone. I knew it was probably blowing up with calls from the sheriff, or maybe even Brandon begging for a lifeline. I took the battery out of the prepaid phone and dropped it into a trash can near the gate. The line was dead. I boarded the plane. I sat in a seat that was wider than the bed I had slept in for the last 5 years. The flight attendant brought me a glass of red wine. It was a Barolo, thick and dark. I held the glass up to the light. The plane taxied to the runway. The engines roared a sound not unlike the excavator that had crushed my front gate. We gathered speed. The force pressed me back into the seat. We lifted off. I looked out the window. Chicago spread out below me, a grid of lights and shadows. Somewhere down there in the dark maze of the suburbs was a pile of debris that used to be a mansion. Somewhere down there, a man who used to be my son was standing in the cold, realizing that winter had finally come. He was facing the Russos. He was facing the IRS. He was facing the silence of a phone that would never ring again. I took a sip of the wine. It tasted like earth and fruit and freedom. I thought about the killer line, the words I would have said if I had stayed, but I realized I had already said them. My actions were the line. The check in my pocket was the line. The view from 30,000 feet was the line. "I do not have a son down there," I whispered to the window. "I only have a bad investment that I finally wrote off." I turned away from the glass. I opened the menu. I prepared to cross the ocean. I was 70 years old, and for the first time in my life, I was not building a future for someone else. I was flying toward my own. The past was demolished. The site was clear, and the view from here was magnificent. We spend our lives building foundations for others, our children, our spouses, our legacies. We pour our sweat into the mortar, believing that sacrifice is the highest form of love. But I learned the hard way that a foundation built on disrespect will always crumble, no matter how much money you use to patch the cracks. You cannot buy loyalty, and you certainly cannot inherit character. Sometimes the most loving thing a father can do is stop shielding his son from the consequences of his own actions. I finally learned that my dignity has a price tag, and it is not negotiable. It is never too late to pick up the hammer and build a new life, even if you have to tear the old one down first. If you believe that respect must be earned and justice should always be served, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this.